The interpreter's badge caught the studio lights as she raised her hand during Trevor Noah's interview. Ellen was about to ask the former Daily Show host another question about his comedy tour when she noticed the woman in the fourth row holding up a small card that read, "Please help my son." What happened next would transform a routine celebrity interview into one of the most powerful moments in television history, proving that sometimes the most important voices in the room are the ones that struggle to be heard. It was a bright Thursday afternoon at the Ellen DeGeneres Show, and the studio was packed with 400 excited audience members eager to see one of comedy's most thoughtful voices. Ellen, stunning in a crisp white blazer with subtle gold accents, was thoroughly enjoying her conversation with Trevor Noah, who looked characteristically sharp in a charcoal gray suit, his warm smile filling the studio as he discussed his latest book and upcoming comedy tour. "Trevor," Ellen said, settling back into her interview chair, "you've talked a lot about growing up between languages and cultures in South Africa. How has that shaped your comedy?" Trevor's eyes lit up with that intellectual curiosity that had made him such a compelling television host. "You know, Ellen, when you grow up translating between worlds, you develop this ability to find humor in miscommunication, in the spaces between what people mean and what they say. Comedy becomes a universal language." The audience chuckled appreciatively. This was exactly the kind of insightful conversation that made Ellen's celebrity interviews must-see television. "And speaking of universal languages," Ellen continued, "I understand you still speak several languages fluently. That must be helpful when you're touring internationally." "It is," Trevor nodded enthusiastically. "There's something magical about connecting with an audience in their own language. It breaks down barriers instantly. Language is such a gift, but it can also be such a barrier when—" That's when Ellen noticed her. In the fourth row, slightly to the right, sat a woman in her mid-40s who had been listening intently to Trevor's every word about language and barriers. She had shoulder-length brown hair and wore a simple navy dress with a small professional badge pinned to the lapel. Her name was Carmen Delgado, and the badge identified her as a certified ASL interpreter. What caught Ellen's attention wasn't Carmen's appearance, but the way she was urgently trying to get Ellen's attention while tears streamed down her face. Carmen held up a small white card with handwritten words. "Please help my son." Ellen's instincts, refined through 20 years of reading audiences, told her this wasn't a typical fan request. The desperation in Carmen's eyes spoke of something much more serious. "Trevor," Ellen said gently, "hold that thought about language barriers for just a moment." Trevor paused, following Ellen's gaze toward the audience. His expression immediately shifted from entertainer to concerned human being as he noticed Carmen's distress. Ellen stood up from her chair and took several steps toward the audience. "Ma'am in the fourth row with the card, what's your name?" Carmen lowered the card, suddenly embarrassed by the attention of 400 people and multiple cameras. "Carmen Delgado," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for interrupting. When you were talking about language barriers..." Ellen didn't hesitate. She walked down the steps, separating the stage from the audience, something she did only when her instincts told her a moment was bigger than entertainment. "Carmen, you're an interpreter," Ellen observed, noting the badge. "What kind of help does your son need?" Carmen's composure cracked completely. "My son Danny is 16, and he's been deaf since birth. For years I've been his voice, his connection to the hearing world, but last month he told me something that broke my heart." Ellen knelt down in the aisle beside Carmen's row, her white blazer spreading around her. The cameras adjusted to capture both women, but Ellen's focus was entirely on Carmen. "What did Danny tell you?" "He said he doesn't want me to interpret for him anymore. He said he's tired of being seen as broken, tired of people looking at me instead of him when he's trying to communicate. He wants to find his own voice, but he's terrified that the world won't listen. From the stage, Trevor Noah leaned forward in his chair, his comedian's energy replaced by deep attention. As someone who had navigated between languages and cultures his entire life, Carmen's words struck him profoundly. Ellen took Carmen's hands in her own. "And you're here today because yesterday, Danny tried to order food at a restaurant by himself. The cashier got frustrated when she couldn't understand him, and she started talking louder and slower, like he was stupid instead of deaf. Danny came home in tears, saying maybe he should just stay quiet forever." The studio fell into that particular silence that happens when hundreds of people simultaneously recognize they've heard something that matters. Ellen stood up slowly. "Carmen, is Danny here with you today?" Carmen shook her head. "He's at home. He didn't want to come because he said talk shows are for people with voices, and he doesn't think anyone wants to hear what he has to say." Trevor Noah, without being asked, stood up from his chair on the stage. "Carmen, if I may, I grew up in a country where my very existence was illegal because of apartheid. I spoke multiple languages, but there were places where none of them mattered because of the color of my skin. What your son is experiencing, that frustration of not being heard, it's something I understand." Carmen looked up at Trevor with surprise and gratitude. "Really? Really," Trevor said. "And I want to tell you something about finding your voice. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay quiet, even when the world tries to make you feel like your words don't matter." Ellen made a decision that would define this moment forever. "Carmen, I want to call Danny right now. I want to talk to him, and I want Trevor to talk to him. But most importantly, I want him to know that we want to hear what he has to say." Carmen's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "Not just that," Ellen said. "I want Danny to come on this show, not as someone who needs help, but as someone who has something important to teach all of us." Within minutes, Ellen's production team had Carmen on her phone with Danny. The call was put on speaker so the entire studio could hear. When Danny's voice came through, it was clear and strong, despite his deafness affecting his pronunciation. "Danny," Ellen said, speaking clearly towards the phone, "this is Ellen DeGeneres, and I'm here with your mom and Trevor Noah. We want you to know something. We've been talking about voices and languages, and we think yours is one we need to hear." There was a pause, then Danny's voice again. "But people don't understand when I talk." Trevor Noah leaned toward the phone. "Danny, this is Trevor. I want to tell you something my grandmother told me when I was young and felt like nobody understood me. The world doesn't get to decide if your voice matters. You do. And right now, I'm telling you that your voice matters to me." Carmen was crying openly now, not from sadness, but from relief and hope. "Danny," Ellen continued, "what would you say to other young people who feel like they can't be heard?" Danny's response came after a thoughtful pause. "I would tell them that being different isn't being broken, and maybe the people who don't want to listen are the ones who need to learn something new." The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't typical celebrity response applause. It was the deep, emotional recognition of wisdom that cuts through pretense and speaks truth. Ellen stood up and began removing her white blazer. "Carmen, this blazer has been with me through some of my most important interviews, but today it's witnessing something more important than any celebrity conversation. It's witnessing a mother's love and a young man's courage." She placed the blazer around Carmen's shoulders. "I want you to give this to Danny, and I want you to tell him that next week he's going to be my guest. Not to talk about being deaf, but to talk about what it means to find your voice when the world tries to keep you quiet." Trevor Noah walked down from the stage and approached Carmen directly. "And Carmen, I want to give you my contact information. Not for publicity, but because I want to help Danny write his story, his way. Some of the most powerful voices I know are the ones that had to fight to be heard. But the moment that brought the entire studio to tears came when Ellen asked Carmen what she thought Danny would want people to know about him. "He would want them to know that he has so much to say," Carmen said through her tears. "He writes poetry. He loves science. He makes his friends laugh until their sides hurt. Being deaf doesn't make him less of anything. It just makes him Danny." 2 weeks later, Danny Delgado appeared on the Ellen DeGeneres show as a featured guest, not in the audience, but on the main stage. He spoke about his poetry, demonstrated some of his favorite signs, and challenged the hearing world to expand their definition of communication. Trevor Noah, who had stayed in touch with the family, appeared via video call to read one of Danny's poems aloud, proving that voices come in many forms. The episode sparked a national conversation about accessibility, communication, and the courage it takes to claim your space in a world that doesn't always make room for you. Ellen's show began featuring ASL interpreters for every broadcast, and Danny's poetry was published in a collection that became a bestseller. Ellen learned that day that her job wasn't to interview famous people about their projects. Her job was to amplify the voices that needed to be heard, to create space for the stories that change how we see each other. Trevor Noah learned that the most important performances happen not on comedy stages, but in living rooms where young people decide whether they're brave enough to speak their truth. And Carmen Delgado learned that sometimes, when you're scared your child's voice will never be heard, that's exactly when the world is ready to listen. Because the most powerful conversations aren't about people who have platforms. They're about people who create their own platforms, and the strangers who choose to hand them the microphone.